and thank you for inviting me over here to Kazan, to Russia. It's the first time in my life in Russia, so all of you friends that have asked me to come over here, thank you very much for asking me so many times. Finally, I'm here. I also am employed by Netnod. I'm head of research and development, and as such, we are really happy to be the sponsor, one of the sponsors of this meeting, and specifically the social event tonight. And thank you to RIPE NCC for organizing all of this. Okay, with all of those normal standard words, on to business. One thing that I do is that I'm also chair of the Security and Stability Advisory Committee of ICANN. And in that group, we are responsible for giving advice to ICANN board and the community for security and stability issues related to the identifiers that we use on the internet. Next slide, please. So what we are doing is that we are looking at the various activities that ICANN and other organizations are dealing with related to domain names, IP addresses, routing, and whatnot. And we try to find out what kind of advice and recommendations we can give to whom that might have a positive effect regarding robustness of the internet. We, of course, do look mostly on domain names, but we're also looking at other issues. For example, the depletion of IPv4 and the management of the routing space in BGP4. We are at the moment 35 members, and we are creating various documents between 4 and 8 each year. And we have so far published 71 publications since we started. Next slide, please. So what we are doing is that, maybe I should try the clicker. Okay, let me try the clicker. I was told it might not work, but let's try the clicker. Okay, so what we are, the 71 publications we have, we actually published 2 publications since Friday last week and 1 this morning. So my apologies to everyone that got early versions of my slides. I had to submit new version today. What I'm going to talk about today is the work that we have been doing regarding and related to the IANA stewardship transition. Okay. Next slide, please. So the background is that the US government, Department of Commerce of the US government, have 2 contracts with ICANN related to the management of identifiers. One of them, which has to do with operations of the IANA function, is expiring in September this year. This contract can be extended for 2 two-year periods, but already originally when this contract was signed the first time around 1997, it was envisioned that this contract would not be extended. So in March 2014, the US government announced that they don't have an interest of extending this contract. So what people talk about a transition, what actually is happening is that the contract is expiring. And the question that is asked, that the community is asked by the US government is, what do the community think should happen, if anything, given that this contract expires? Next slide, please. So what happened was that the US government asked ICANN to host a process that answers this question. And the group that two groups that ICANN created was the ICG, the coordination group for the IANA function, and also what is called a cross-constituency working group on accountability. The ICG, in turn, divided its work in 3 different tracks, 1 per operation community, where one of those 3 is the RIR, the regional registries that manage IP addresses, where RIPE-NCC is one of 5. The other 2 groups that ICG is collecting information from is the IETF for protocol parameters and ICANN itself for domain names. So this whole process, by having these multiple groups running bottom-up processes and coordinating their proposal in one document that is to be sent to the US government, is something that we in SSAC have been looking at. Next slide, please. So specifically, we have been looking at the issues that are related with domain names, because that's where most of the weaknesses exist regarding oversight and accountability. The IETF for protocol parameters already have SLAs, they already had oversight over the IANA function. The RIRs already have an MOU, and they are already looking into establishing a similar relationship with ICANN, but domain names is more problematic. Next slide, please. So what we did was that we have written a number of documents, and let's take them one by one. Let's start with number 67, Overview and History of the IANA Functions. And all of these documents, except the last one that was published this morning, are translated to the 6 UN languages plus Portuguese, which means that they do exist in Russian. So next slide, please. This first document explains, from our perspective, what IANA function actually is doing. What is IANA doing? So for people that don't really know what IANA is, or even if you do think you know what IANA is, please read this document, because this gives, from our perspective, a quite good specification over what IANA is doing. It's also the case that many of the processes, specifically on the domain name side, they very explicitly compare their document on what should happen when the IANA contract expires with what we have written, to make sure that nothing is forgotten about. So this report focuses on the IANA functions contract and describes all the activities related to the IANA functions as well. Next slide, please. Oops, there. The next document, number 68, is slightly different from the first one. The second one looks at the contract itself. Next slide, please. So number 67 talks about what IANA is doing. 68 is talking about what the US government has asked ICANN to do as part of IANA contract. So by comparing 67 and 68, it is possible to see, for example, what IANA is doing that is not under the contract, and what is in the contract, but IANA is still not doing it, which is kind of interesting, but there are a couple of those things as well. So in number 68, we have walked through the contract, looked at each one of the requirements, and we have identified what the processes are, what kind of SLAs they are, how it is implemented. Next slide, please. And if it is the case, and for each one of the functions that you see here to the left, we have identified what parties are involved in that specific activity in the contract, and also, which you see in the rightmost contract, is what the role of the US government is, if any. Because one of the concerns, of course, from the world has been, including the United States domestically, is of course what role the US government have in the management of the IP addresses, domain names, and protocol parameters. And as we have seen here, and as we identified, it's actually very few issues that US government formally is involved in, mostly the management of the root zone of the DNS. Next slide, please. That was not really what the page looks like, but it doesn't matter. Oh, there. Interesting. So if we look at the root zone management, what is happening today is that each registry, for example, a CCTLD or any kind of TLD for the DNS, that want to have a change made, do send in a change request to IANA. IANA is validating the request and sends the change request to VeriSign, which is technically management the root zone, but sends it via the via NTA, which is the root zone administrator, via the US government. And not until both IANA, the US government, and VeriSign, all three, are happy with the change request and think that the request of change is correct, then VeriSign is making the change to the root zone, and the root zone, the new version of the root zone, or the WHOIS servers, or whatever the changes are, is pushed to the root name servers or published in the WHOIS server. So this is one active role, one of the very, very few active roles the US government have, which will no longer exist when the contract has expired. And this is one question to the community: is there a need for the same third-party oversight or not? And if there is a need, what should it be? Next slide, please. The next document we wrote was number 69. And if the first two were neutral documents describing in an objective way what IANA was doing and what was covered in the contracts, the third one is stating from an SSAC perspective, very biased, that what we believe needs to be done to ensure that we preserve the security and stability of the protocol parameters, domain names, and IP addresses that we use. Next slide, please. This was published in December 2014, and it's a complement to the two previous documents. There are lots of references back to the other two, of course. It presents a list of questions and issues that, from our perspective, must be addressed by the communities before the transition happens, which means before the contract expires. And this implies that from an SSAC perspective, the US government should request an extension of the contract until all of these questions and issues are responded to. We do not, from SSAC perspective, take any stand in what the solution is, because we do trust the multi-stakeholder community to be able to come up with answers which are satisfactory, but the important thing is that there are answers. Next slide, please. So if we look at the root zone management specifically, what we are saying is that today the system is extremely reliable, resilient, and efficient. And the new system must be at least as efficient, as reliable, and as resilient as what we have today. This means that by looking at, for example, the response time from IANA, the time it takes to publish a root zone, all of those values must be met or better in the new system. It is also the case that the oversight that exists today, how the process is audited, how low the risk is that the wrong information ends up in the root zone, that must be preserved. We cannot risk that we get wrong information in the root zone, or that someone that would like to have a change made to the root zone cannot get the change done. It is also important, of course, that NTIA explain what legal framework they operate in today and what kind of legal protection the operation of the root zone have today, to ensure that also from a legal perspective, the operation will continue with the same kind of stability as it has before. And we there think about all different kind of things, like protection from the process being sued in civil courts, to issues when crimes has been committed by staff or otherwise, and also how to handle, which is dealt with in a quite reasonable way today, how IANA, that must be able to have customers and clients all over the world, handle the situation in the future that when in interactions with entities under various sanctions. Next slide, please. It is also important that each one of the functions that IANA is providing today, it's really important that the operation communities do decide explicitly whether that function should continue as it is today or whether it should be changed. And as we point out in SSAC 68 in the previous document, there are actually very few processes that must change just because the US government is simply not involved in them. Next slide, please. And we can go directly to the next one again. And then we have the next document, which we published this morning. So you're the first audience that actually, well, some people might have seen it already like a few hours ago, but you're the first one that I explain it to. As I started by saying, there are two different processes. One that has to do with the actual management of IP addresses, domain names, and protocol parameters. The other one on accountability. And this cross-community working group on accountability have had a proposal out for open comment, where the open comment period closed on June 3rd last week. That was extended to June 10, and this is our response during that open consultation. Next slide, please. There is a proposal in this group that ICANN has turned into a membership organization where each one of the so-called supporting organizations or advisory committees of ICANN ends up being members. So for example, the ASO for IP addresses ends up being one of the members, and SSAC is supposed to be another one of the members of this membership organization. The proposal is that each one of the members should get 5 votes, except SSAC and RSAC that get 2 votes. What we are saying from SSAC is that we have not asked to become this kind of member in this organization, and the way we work have a little bit of strange, we have some issues actually be able to actually make decisions and actually vote if we are forced to. Because our charter is to advise the ICANN community and board on matters relating to the security and integrity of the Internet's naming and address allocation systems. It doesn't say anything about organizational audit or organizational oversight in there. So, we please ask the CCWG accountability to take that into account, that SSAC actually is a little bit special compared to the other SOs. So what we're saying is, to be explicit, that our pure advisory role on security and stability is probably the way that the community can use us best. Next slide, please. It is also, we don't have any comments today on the legal structure, whether that is required or desirable. And this is also part of the fact that we are not doing those kind of judgment because we don't feel today that that is actually having an impact on the security and stability of the parameters. There are other questions and answers that need to be responded to. It is also the case that we do expect that the community will come up with some kind of structure of ICANN and oversight over ICANN that will still make it possible to, in the future, to have advisory committees that are giving advice to the more formal PDPs that exist, for example, in GNSO, CCNSO, and ASO. Next slide, please. And that's it. Thank you very much. Yes. Yes, please. Questions?
Работает. Дмитрий Бурков. Patrik, what do you think will be more dangerous? Should we keep one balls in one basket? It's regarding all IANA functions. What can be better? Divorce of these functions or more complicated marriage? Because I can keep in my head my functions as a utility registry and a number registry. But now, regarding this development process, the proposal is more complex and complex. You know that I always was against one basket. What do you think as SSAC chair?
We in SSAC, we have not seen any implications on the security and stability, neither if the functions are kept together, nor if they are split. The important thing is that the oversight and the management of each one of these parameters are continued to work in as efficient way as possible.
Thank you very much.
Okay, one. Dmitry Kochmanyuk, .ua. Well, there have been a lot of talks about government's role, and I know you're not in the government position. What do you think the governments should do, or people who are connected with the governments do, with regards to this transition? I know there's GAC, but maybe other things.
So I think governments, they are represented in the process by being members of the Government Advisory Committee, GAC. The first thing I think governments should do is that they should be members of GAC and participate there. There are countries in the world that are not members of GAC. One of them being Ireland, okay, which have so much IT industry. So the first thing governments should do is to exercise that membership and discuss there, because that is the main path for government's advice to come forward. The next thing that government should do is to participate at meetings like this, because we do have and do believe in multi-stakeholder processes, where also governments is one important stakeholder. Now, governments do have a little bit special role, as they are also the legislator in the various jurisdictions they are responsible for, and they respond to the electorate that they have, and that's also where we are. So to some degree, the individuals do participate through sort of two channels in this process, which makes it a little bit complicated. But we have seen in most cases, the discussion works the best if government participates in two cases. One, in GAC, where they can exercise the special role they have, and two, by participating in processes like this.
Thank you. And I'm glad that, well, Dmitry Bykov also attends GAC meetings, at least. I have seen him at every meeting I've seen, so maybe it's another thanks to him.
I don't think people hear what you are saying. You must speak much closer to the microphone.
Right. No, I hear it. I said Dmitry Bykov has been participating in GAC meeting from Russia's delegation, I would say, and also I'm glad that I have seen somebody from the Tatarstan government to speak. Sorry, I forgot his name. My fault.
Yeah.
So, thank you, Patrik.
Okay. Thank you very much.